He thought she didn't belong in a place where cars cost more than most homes. But he had no idea he had just insulted a woman who could buy the entire showroom without blinking. The glass doors of Westbridge Luxury Motors slid open with a soft hydraulic hiss as Sophia Bennett stepped inside, her worn sneakers whispering against the polished marble floors that reflected rows of six-figure vehicles gleaming under perfect white lights. The kind of place where every surface sparkled with quiet, wealth, and every glance carried judgment. And yet she walked in without hesitation, dressed in a simple white t-shirt and faded blue jeans, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail, her expression calm, almost detached, as if she had seen rooms far more intimidating than this one. Across the showroom, a salesman in a tailored navy suit paused mid-conversation, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in her appearance. The subtle shift in his posture enough to signal what he had already decided about her before she even spoke a word. Sophia's gaze drifted across the lineup of vehicles until it settled on a sleek midnight black coupe displayed on a raised platform, its curves catching the light like a sculpture designed to impress rather than simply transport. And for a brief moment, something softer flickered in her eyes, a quiet purpose that didn't match the assumptions forming around her. She took a few steps closer, her movements unhurried, while nearby employees exchanged quick glances, the kind that didn't need words to communicate skepticism. No one greeted her, no one offered assistance, the silence itself becoming its own form of dismissal. Then came the sound of polished shoes approaching, measured, confident, practiced, and Blake Thompson appeared at her side with a smile that never quite reached his eyes, his posture straight, his tone smooth but edged with something colder beneath the surface. "Can I help you?" he asked, though the question felt more like a formality than an invitation. Sophia turned slightly, meeting his gaze with steady calm. "Yes, I'd like to learn more about that model," she said, her voice even, almost gentle, as she gestured toward the coupe. Blake followed her gesture, then let out a soft chuckle, barely concealed. "That vehicle starts at around $320,000, he replied, emphasizing the number just enough to linger in the air. "It's usually reserved for clients who schedule private appointments." And though his words were polite on the surface, the meaning underneath was unmistakable. A couple nearby paused their conversation, their attention subtly shifting toward the exchange, while another salesman leaned against a desk, watching with quiet amusement. Sophia didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't offer any defense or explanation. She simply nodded once, as if acknowledging information rather than absorbing an insult, her composure almost unsettling in its steadiness. Blake's smile tightened slightly, the lack of reaction clearly not what he expected, and he took a small step closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound confidential while still being heard by those nearby. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable looking at our pre-owned inventory," he suggested, his tone carrying a polished condescension. "It's in a separate building about 2 blocks down." And for a brief second, the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see how she would respond. Sophia's eyes moved from the car back to him, calm, unreadable, as if measuring something far beyond the moment itself. And when she spoke again, her voice remained steady, almost quiet. "I'm interested in this one," she said simply. The faint smirk on Blake's face widened, and somewhere behind him, a soft laugh slipped out before quickly being stifled. The air shifted, tension settling in like a slow-moving storm. And though nothing loud had been said, the message had already been delivered, clear and cutting. And still, Sophia stood there without raising her voice, without stepping back, her presence calm in a room that had already decided she didn't belong. And in that silence, something unseen began to take shape, something Blake Thompson would not understand until it was far too late. Blake let the silence stretch just long enough to make the moment uncomfortable, then exhaled through his nose with a faint, dismissive smile as if the outcome had already been decided in his favor, his eyes scanning Sophia once more from her scuffed sneakers to her plain shirt, reinforcing his earlier judgment. And when he spoke again, his tone carried a sharper edge, no longer bothering to hide the condescension beneath professional courtesy. "Ma'am, I think you are misunderstanding how things work here," he said, his voice slightly louder now, enough for the surrounding customers to clearly hear. "This is not a walk-in and browse type of place when it comes to our premium inventory. A couple standing near a silver sedan exchanged glances, their curiosity now fully engaged, while another employee leaned casually against a counter, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with thinly veiled amusement. Sophia remained still, her posture relaxed, her gaze steady on Blake as though the growing attention around them had no effect on her at all. "I understand perfectly," she replied, her voice calm and even. "I would just like to see the interior." Her request was simple, almost understated, yet it seemed to irritate Blake more than any argument could have. His smile tightened, and he gave a short, humorless laugh. "The interior is only shown to serious buyers," he said, emphasizing the phrase in a way that made its meaning unmistakable, and this time a quiet chuckle slipped from somewhere behind him, quickly followed by a whisper that did not quite fade fast enough. The room was no longer pretending not to notice. The attention had settled fully on Sophia, and with it came the weight of collective judgment. Blake took a small step closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound controlled while still projecting authority. "Look, I am trying to save you some time," he continued. "These vehicles are not exactly within reach for everyone, and I would hate for you to feel embarrassed when we go over pricing." The word embarrassed lingered in the air like a deliberate strike, subtle but cutting, and for the first time a faint flush rose to Sophia's cheeks, not from shame, but from something deeper, something measured, something held firmly in check. Her fingers brushed lightly against the edge of the display platform as she glanced once more at the black coupe, her expression thoughtful rather than defeated, as if she were considering something far beyond the conversation itself. Blake misread the pause as hesitation, and his confidence grew. "Why do you not come back another day?" he added, straightening his tie. "Maybe after setting up an appointment, dressed appropriately for the type of transaction you are attempting to make." The words were smoother now, polished, but the implication was unmistakable, and this time the reaction from the room was not hidden. A few customers looked down, uncomfortable, while others watched with open curiosity, waiting to see how far the situation would go. Sophia slowly turned her gaze back to Blake, her eyes calm, unwavering, and when she spoke her voice remained soft, almost gentle. "Are you refusing to show me the car?" she asked, the simplicity of the question cutting through the tension more sharply than any raised voice could have. Blake hesitated for a fraction of a second, then lifted his chin slightly, settling into his authority. "I am suggesting that this may not be the right fit for you," he replied, carefully choosing his words. "And yes, if necessary, I can ask you to leave so we can focus on our actual clients." The phrase "actual clients" landed heavily, and for a moment the entire showroom seemed to still. Conversations faded, footsteps paused, even the ambient music felt distant, and in that quiet, Sophia held his gaze without anger, without defensiveness, only a steady calm that did not match the situation at all. She gave a small nod, almost as if acknowledging a conclusion rather than accepting defeat, then stepped back from the platform, her movements unhurried, deliberate. She did not argue, did not raise her voice, did not try to prove anything in that moment. And that, more than anything else, unsettled the air in the room, because while Blake believed he had just dismissed someone who did not belong, Sophia Bennett walked toward the exit with the quiet composure of someone who already knew exactly how this story would end. The glass doors closed behind Sophia with a soft, final click, sealing the moment inside the showroom as if nothing of importance had just occurred. Yet the tension she left behind lingered in the air like a question no one wanted to answer. Blake adjusted his cufflinks with a quiet satisfaction, turning back toward the couple he had been assisting earlier, his smile returning smoothly as though the interruption had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "Now, as I was saying, this model comes with a custom interior package," he continued, his tone polished and confident, but the rhythm of his words felt slightly off, just enough to reveal that something had shifted beneath the surface. The couple nodded politely, though their attention seemed divided, their eyes drifting occasionally toward the exit where Sophia had disappeared, while across the room, the younger salesman Daniel hesitated near the counter, his expression uneasy as he replayed the interaction in his mind. There had been something about her composure, something that did not match the assumptions everyone else had made. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by the normal flow of business. Conversations resumed, footsteps echoed across the marble floors, and within minutes the showroom returned to its usual rhythm, as if the incident had already been forgotten. Yet outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Sophia walked calmly toward the street, her pace steady, her posture unchanged. She did not look back, did not pause. Her expression remained composed, but her eyes held a quiet resolve, the kind that came from experience rather than emotion. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, the screen lighting up in her hand, and for a brief moment she stood still, considering. Then she dialed a number from memory, holding the phone to her ear as the call connected. "Daniel," she said softly when the line picked up, her voice calm, almost gentle. "I stopped by Westbridge Luxury Motors today." There was a brief pause on the other end, followed by a familiar voice, warm but attentive. "And how did it go?" he asked. And for a second Sophia's gaze lifted toward the showroom in the distance, the glass facade reflecting the fading light. "It was informative," she replied, choosing her words carefully, not out of hesitation but precision. "I think you might find it interesting as well." The silence that followed carried understanding, not confusion. "I see," Daniel said quietly, his tone shifting, something sharper. "Beneath the surface now. Would you like me to take a look?" Sophia's lips curved into the faintest smile, not one of amusement but certainty. "Tomorrow," she said simply. "I think tomorrow will be perfect." She ended the call without further explanation, slipping the phone back into her pocket as she turned away, her steps carrying her down the sidewalk with the same quiet confidence she had walked in with. Back inside the showroom, Blake concluded his sale with a firm handshake, the couple thanking him before leaving, their departure marked by the soft chime of the door. He watched them go with satisfaction, already calculating his commission, already moving on to the next opportunity, unaware that the decision he had made minutes earlier was about to follow him into the next day in a way he could not predict. The lights overhead reflected perfectly off the rows of cars, pristine, untouched, waiting for the right buyer, and in the stillness of that polished space, everything appeared exactly as it should be. Yet beneath that flawless surface, something had already begun to shift, quiet, inevitable, and just beyond the reach of anyone who believed they were still in control. The next morning arrived with a quiet clarity, the kind that made everything feel sharper, more defined. As the sun rose over Westbridge Luxury Motors and cast a clean golden light across the glass facade, inside the showroom the staff moved through their routines with practiced efficiency, straightening brochures, polishing already spotless surfaces, preparing for another day of high expectations and high-value transactions. Blake Thompson stepped onto the floor with his usual confidence, adjusting his tailored suit jacket as he glanced over the lineup of vehicles. Everything exactly where it should be, everything under control, or so he believed. He exchanged brief greetings with the team, his tone light, his demeanor composed, though there was a subtle impatience in the way he checked his watch, as if anticipating a particularly important client. Near the entrance, Daniel lingered by the front desk, his attention drifting toward the glass doors more often than necessary. He could not explain why, but something from the previous day had stayed with him, a quiet unease that refused to settle. The memory of Sophia's calm expression replaying in his mind with increasing clarity, it did not match the narrative Blake had confidently imposed, and that discrepancy lingered, just beneath the surface. Then, just after 9:15 in the morning, a low, almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere occurred. It began as a sound, distant at first, the smooth, unmistakable hum of an engine engineered for silence rather than noise, subtle yet powerful. And as it grew closer, conversations inside the showroom began to fade, not abruptly, but gradually, as attention turned toward the front windows. Outside, a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided into view, its polished surface reflecting the morning light with a quiet authority that did not need to announce itself. It did not rush, did not hesitate. It simply arrived, coming to a precise, deliberate stop directly in front of the entrance. And in that moment, the energy inside the showroom shifted completely. Staff members straightened instinctively, eyes widened just slightly, recognition flickering across faces as the significance of the vehicle registered. This was not an ordinary client. This was presence, Blake turned toward the entrance, his expression sharpening as he quickly recalibrated, his posture adjusting, his smile returning. But this time with genuine anticipation, he moved forward, already preparing his greeting, already positioning himself to handle what he assumed would be one of the most valuable interactions of the day. The showroom doors slid open automatically, and for a brief second, the outside light framed the scene like a stage. The driver's door remained closed, the engine idling with controlled precision. Then the rear passenger door opened smoothly, and a man stepped out, tall, composed, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that fit with effortless precision. His presence carried a quiet authority, the kind that did not rely on display but on certainty. His gaze swept briefly across the showroom, not hurried, not searching, simply aware. And as he began to walk toward the entrance, the room fell into a subtle, almost reverent silence. Blake stepped forward with confidence, extending his hand slightly as he approached, his tone warm, respectful. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to Westbridge Luxury Motors," he began, but the man did not immediately respond. Instead, his eyes moved past Blake, scanning the interior with a calm, deliberate focus, as if measuring something unseen. And then, just as Blake's smile began to tighten with uncertainty, the man spoke, his voice steady, controlled. "I believe someone here had an interesting interaction yesterday," he said, and the words landed with a quiet weight that immediately shifted the tone of the room. Blake's expression flickered for a fraction of a second, confusion mixing with recognition, though he could not yet place why. "I am sorry, sir. I am not sure I follow," he replied carefully, his voice still professional, but now edged with caution. The man held his gaze for a moment longer, then glanced briefly toward the open door behind him. And in that instant, something in the air changed again, something sharper, more defined, as footsteps approached from outside, steady, unhurried, familiar. And before Blake could fully process what was happening, Sophia Bennett stepped into the showroom once more, her presence calm, her expression unchanged, yet everything about the moment felt different. The room went completely still, and for the first time since she had walked in the day before, it was not judgment that filled the silence, but realization beginning to take shape. The moment Sophia stepped fully into the showroom, the balance of power shifted so quietly that it almost went unnoticed, yet every person in the room felt it. A subtle tightening in the air, a stillness that replaced the casual confidence of moments before. Blake's extended hand slowly lowered, his expression caught between recognition and disbelief as his eyes moved from Sophia to the man beside her, then back again. Searching for a connection he had failed to see the day before, Sophia did not rush, did not acknowledge the tension directly. She simply walked forward with the same measured pace, her presence calm, composed, unchanged, yet now framed by context that no one could ignore. The man beside her turned slightly toward her, his posture relaxed but deliberate. "Is this the place?" he asked, his voice low but clear enough to carry across the silent room. Sophia gave a small nod, her gaze briefly sweeping across the showroom before settling on Blake. "Yes," she said simply, and that single word seemed to echo louder than anything that had been said the day before. Blake cleared his throat, instinctively adjusting his tie as he tried to regain control of the situation. "Sir, if there has been any misunderstanding, I would be more than happy to assist you today," he began, his tone carefully measured, respectful now in a way it had not been before. The man's eyes shifted back to him, calm, assessing. "I am sure you would," he replied, and there was something in his voice that made the words feel less like acceptance and more like observation, a quiet evaluation of everything that had already happened. Daniel Carter did not raise his voice, did not need to. His presence alone commanded attention, and as his name began to circulate in hushed whispers among the staff, recognition spread like a ripple through still water. A senior associate near the back stiffened slightly. Another employee exchanged a quick glance with Daniel, the junior salesman. The realization settling in piece by piece. Blake's confidence faltered for the first time, not visibly to the untrained eye, but enough that the edges of his composure began to soften. "Mr. Carter," he said carefully, now certain of who stood before him. "Welcome. It is an honor to have you here." The shift in tone was immediate, unmistakable. but it came too late to erase what had already been done. Sophia watched the exchange without interruption, her expression unchanged, neither satisfied nor offended, simply present, and that calm seemed to carry more weight than any confrontation could have. Daniel glanced briefly at her, then back at Blake. "Yesterday, my wife came here with a simple request," he said, his voice even, controlled, each word placed with precision. The room seemed to hold its breath, every employee acutely aware that they were now part of a moment they could not step away from. Blake's throat tightened slightly, his mind racing to reconstruct the interaction, to find a version of events that could be explained, justified, softened. "If there was any inconvenience, I assure you it was unintentional," he replied, his words careful, but lacking the certainty he had displayed the day before. Sophia's gaze remained steady, and for the first time, she spoke directly into the silence that had formed around them. "You told me I did not belong here," she said, her voice calm, not accusatory, simply factual, and that made it land harder than any raised voice ever could. A faint murmur moved through the room before quickly fading again. Blake's mouth opened slightly, then closed, the memory now clear, undeniable. He searched for a response, but none came quickly enough. Daniel's expression did not change, but there was a subtle shift in his stance, a quiet finality settling into place. "We believe in investing in places that reflect our values," he said, his tone measured, almost conversational, yet carrying a weight that extended far beyond the words themselves. "Respect is one of those values." The statement hung in the air, simple, direct, impossible to misinterpret, and in that moment, the polished showroom, the gleaming cars, the carefully maintained image of exclusivity all seemed secondary to something far more fundamental, something that could not be displayed or purchased. Blake stood there, the confidence that had once defined him now replaced by a silence he could not control, and around him, the room remained still, every eye watching, every thought unspoken, as the true cost of a single moment of judgment revealed itself without the need for anything more. No one moved, not immediately, as Daniel's words settled into the polished silence of the showroom, the kind of silence that no longer belonged to control but to consequence. Blake felt it first, not in the room but within himself, a subtle shift where certainty once lived, replaced now by something far less stable, something he could not smooth over with tone or posture. He straightened instinctively, as if trying to regain ground that had already disappeared. "Mr. Carter, I assure you that we hold all our clients to the highest standard of respect," he said, choosing each word carefully. But the statement sounded hollow even as it left his mouth, because everyone in the room had already witnessed otherwise. Daniel did not interrupt, did not raise his voice. He simply let the words hang there, unchallenged, and in that lack of reaction, the gap between what was said and what was true became impossible to ignore. Sophia remained still beside him, her presence steady, her silence more powerful than any argument could have been. She was not there to escalate, not there to prove anything, and that alone reshaped the entire moment. A senior manager emerged from an office near the back, drawn by the unusual stillness that had taken over the floor, his expression alert, quickly assessing the situation as he recognized Daniel Carter. His posture shifted instantly, urgency replacing routine. "Mr. Carter, welcome. I was not aware you would be visiting today," he said, his tone respectful, controlled, but carrying an undercurrent of concern. Daniel turned his attention briefly toward him, acknowledging his presence with a small nod. "It was not a scheduled visit," he replied, his voice even, "but sometimes those are the most revealing." The manager's expression tightened slightly, understanding passing through his eyes without needing further explanation. He glanced at Blake, then at Sophia, piecing together what had occurred with increasing clarity. The atmosphere in the showroom shifted again, no longer just tense but focused, as if every detail now mattered in a way it had not before. Blake felt the attention settle on him from all directions, not just from Daniel or Sophia, but from his own colleagues, from the manager, from the customers who had quietly gathered at a distance. And for the first time, he did not have control over how he was being seen. "I may have misjudged the situation yesterday," Blake said finally, his voice lower now, less certain, the words coming slower, as if each one carried weight he could not ignore, if there was any offense caused. It was not intentional, Sophia's gaze remained steady, her expression unchanged, and when she spoke, her voice was calm, almost gentle. Intent does not change the impact, she said, and the simplicity of the statement cut through the room more cleanly than anything else that had been said. No accusation, no raised tone, just truth. And in that moment, there was nowhere left for the situation to hide. Daniel took a slow step forward, his presence quiet but undeniable. "We are not here for an apology," he said, his voice measured. "We are here to understand whether this is a place we can trust." The question was not loud, but it carried further than any demand could have, because it was not directed at Blake alone. It was directed at the entire institution. The manager inhaled slowly, his posture straightening as he stepped forward, fully aware that the response in this moment would define more than just a single interaction. "That is a fair question," he said, his tone steady, "and one we take seriously." He paused briefly, then continued. "What happened yesterday does not reflect the standard we expect here." The acknowledgement was direct, unambiguous, and it shifted the dynamic once again. Blake's shoulders lowered slightly, the realization now complete, not just of what he had done, but of where he stood in its aftermath. The room remained silent, but it was no longer the silence of uncertainty. It was the silence of understanding, the kind that comes when the truth has already revealed itself. Without needing to be repeated, Sophia glanced once more at the black coupe on the platform. The same car she had asked about the day before, its polished surface unchanged, its value untouched, yet everything about the moment surrounding it had transformed, and in that quiet contrast, the real difference became clear, not in what was being sold, but in how people were seen. And as the weight of that realization settled across the showroom, it became impossible for anyone present to pretend that nothing had happened, because something had, and it had changed everything without a single raised voice. The manager's words lingered in the air, steady and deliberate, but the true weight of the moment had not yet reached its final point, because acknowledgement alone was not resolution, and everyone in the showroom seemed to understand that instinctively. Daniel's gaze remained calm, unwavering, as he studied the man in front of him, measuring not just the response but the sincerity behind it. And after a brief pause, he nodded once, not in approval but in recognition of what had been said. "Then let us continue," he replied, his voice even. "Because yesterday, my wife came here with the intention of making a purchase." The statement shifted the atmosphere again, not dramatically, but enough to realign the focus of the room. The situation was no longer only about what had happened, but about what would happen next. The manager turned slightly towards Sophia, his posture respectful. "Ms. Bennett, we would be honored to assist you properly today," he said. And this time there was no hesitation, no underlying assumption, only clarity. Sophia met his gaze briefly, then glanced toward the black coupe on the platform, the same car that had been denied to her less than 24 hours earlier. Her expression remained composed, thoughtful, as if the car itself was no longer the central point, but rather the experience surrounding it. "I would like to see the interior," she said, repeating the same request she had made the day before. But now the words carried a different weight, not because they had changed, but because the room had. The manager immediately gestured toward the vehicle. "Of course," he said, stepping forward, his tone precise, attentive. He moved with a level of care that made the action feel intentional, almost ceremonial, as he reached for the door handle and opened it smoothly, revealing the meticulously crafted interior, the soft leather seats, the refined details, everything exactly as it had been before, yet now presented with a level of respect that had been absent the first time. The room remained quiet, not out of tension now, but out of awareness, every movement observed, every detail understood. Sophia stepped closer, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the door as she looked inside, her expression thoughtful, calm. She took her time, not rushed, not pressured, simply present in the moment. Daniel stood a short distance behind her, his posture relaxed, his attention steady, not intervening, not directing, allowing the moment to unfold on its own terms. Blake remained where he was, slightly off to the side, no longer at the center, no longer controlling the narrative, his presence reduced to observation, and in that shift, the difference between authority and assumption became clear. After a few moments, Sophia stepped back from the car, her gaze moving once more across the showroom, taking in the space, the people, the atmosphere that had changed so completely in such a short time. "It is a beautiful car," she said softly, her voice carrying just enough to be heard. And there was no sarcasm in her tone, no lingering resentment, only a simple acknowledgement. The manager nodded. "It truly is," he replied, though his attention remained focused on her, waiting, not pushing, understanding that the decision now rested entirely with her. Sophia paused, her expression thoughtful, then turned slightly toward Daniel, their eyes meeting for a brief moment, a silent exchange passing between them, one that did not need words to be understood. Daniel gave a small nod, subtle, almost imperceptible, and that was enough. Sophia turned back to the manager, her voice calm, clear. "We will take it," she said, and the words settled into the room with quiet finality, no applause, no sudden reaction, just a collective understanding that the moment had reached its conclusion. The manager inclined his head slightly. "We will prepare everything immediately," he said, his tone steady, respectful, and as the process began, as paperwork was gathered and details arranged, the showroom slowly returned to motion, but it was not the same motion as before. Something had shifted beneath it, something that would remain long after the transaction was complete, because what had been revealed was not just a sale, but a lesson, one that did not need to be spoken aloud to be understood, and in the stillness that followed, the room carried that understanding forward, quiet, undeniable, and lasting. The paperwork began quietly, almost ceremonially, as the manager guided Sophia toward a private desk near the glass wall, away from the center of the showroom, but still within view of everything that had just unfolded. The soft sound of pages turning and pens gliding across paper replaced the earlier tension, yet the weight of the moment remained present in every glance, every movement. Daniel stood beside her, composed and attentive, his presence no longer disruptive but steady, reinforcing the shift that had taken place. The manager explained each detail with precision, his tone respectful, careful, ensuring that nothing was assumed, nothing overlooked, and Sophia listened calmly, asking only a few questions, her voice measured, her demeanor unchanged, as if this moment was simply another step in a process she had always been prepared for. Across the showroom, the staff moved with a different kind of awareness now, quieter, more deliberate. Conversations were softer, laughter absent. Even the smallest gestures carried a sense of recalibration, as though everyone present understood that something fundamental had just been revealed about the way they saw others. Blake remained near the edge of the floor, no longer engaging, no longer directing, his attention fixed on the scene unfolding before him. The confidence that had once defined his posture replaced by a stillness that bordered on disbelief. He watched as the same woman he had dismissed less than a day ago now completed a purchase that represented not just value, but trust. And in that realization, the contrast became impossible to ignore. Daniel, the junior salesman, stood a few feet away, his expression thoughtful, absorbing every detail, every word, as if committing the lesson to memory, because unlike Blake, he understood that what had happened was not just about one interaction, but about a pattern, one that could define a career if left unchecked. The manager returned with a final document, placing it carefully in front of Sophia. "Everything is ready," he said, his voice steady. "Once this is signed, the vehicle will be prepared for delivery." Sophia took the pen, her hand steady as she signed her name with quiet certainty, the motion simple, unhurried, and when she finished, she set the pen down gently, as if marking the completion of something larger than a transaction. The manager nodded once, acknowledging the final step. "Congratulations," he said, and this time the word carried genuine meaning, not because of the purchase itself, but because of the way it had been made. Sophia rose from her seat, her gaze moving briefly across the showroom once more, not lingering, not searching, simply observing, and in that glance there was no triumph, no need for validation, only a quiet clarity. Daniel stepped beside her, his presence aligning naturally with hers, and together they began to walk toward the entrance, their pace unhurried, the room parting subtly as they passed, not out of instruction, but out of recognition. Outside, the Rolls-Royce remained waiting, its polished surface reflecting the midday light. A quiet symbol of the presence that had shifted everything within those walls. The driver stepped forward to open the door, but Daniel paused for a moment, turning slightly back toward the showroom, his gaze settling briefly on the manager, then on the staff beyond. "Thank you for your time," he said, his voice calm, composed, and though the words were simple, they carried a weight that extended beyond courtesy, because they marked the end of the moment, not with confrontation, but with closure. The doors slid open once more, and as Sophia stepped outside, the sunlight caught her face, illuminating the same calm expression she had carried from the beginning, unchanged, unshaken. And as she entered the car, the engine started with a soft, controlled hum, the vehicle pulling away smoothly, leaving behind a showroom that looked exactly as it had before, yet felt entirely different, because within those polished walls, something invisible had shifted, something that could not be undone. And as the doors closed again, the silence that followed was no longer empty, but filled with understanding. The showroom doors closed softly behind the departing car, and for a long moment, no one spoke, no one moved, as if the entire space had been placed on pause, suspended between what had just happened and what it meant. The polished floors still reflected the same rows of luxury vehicles. The lighting remained perfect, the atmosphere controlled. Yet something essential had shifted beneath it all, something that could not be restored by routine or ignored by habit. The manager stood still near the entrance, his posture composed but thoughtful, his gaze lingering on the empty space where the Rolls-Royce had disappeared, as though replaying every moment that had led to this one. Behind him, the staff slowly began to return to their tasks, but their movements carried a different energy now, quieter, more deliberate, as if each person was aware that they were being watched, not by a client, but by their own conscience. Blake remained where he was, his hands resting loosely at his sides, his expression no longer confident, no longer controlled, but reflective in a way that had not been there before, the certainty that had once guided his actions replaced by a quiet realization that could not be undone. He glanced toward the platform where the black coupe had been displayed, the same car that had been dismissed as out of reach just a day earlier, and in that contrast, the full weight of his assumption settled in, not as a dramatic collapse, but as a slow, undeniable understanding. Daniel, the junior salesman, stepped forward slightly, breaking the silence with a careful breath. "We should have treated her differently," he said quietly, not directing the statement at anyone in particular, but allowing it to exist in the space between them. The manager turned his head slightly, acknowledging the truth in the words without needing to respond. Immediately, because there was no argument to be made, no justification that could erase what had already been revealed. "It is not about one person," the manager said finally, his voice calm, measured. "It is about what we choose to see when someone walks through that door." The statement settled into the room with a quiet authority, not as a reprimand, but as a standard, one that would remain long after the moment had passed. Blake lowered his gaze briefly, absorbing the words, not defensively, not with resistance, but with a recognition that felt heavier than any correction could have been, because it was internal, not imposed. And around him, the showroom continued to move, customers entering, conversations resuming, transactions beginning and ending, yet the memory of what had occurred remained woven into the space, subtle but permanent. Later that afternoon, as sunlight shifted across the glass walls and cast longer shadows across the floor, the black coupe was no longer on display, its absence a quiet reminder of the decision that had been made, not just to purchase, but to redefine the moment that led to it. And as the day moved forward, each interaction carried a new awareness, a pause before judgment, a second look before assumption, not out of fear, but out of understanding, because what had been revealed was not about wealth, not about status, but about perception, about the quiet line between seeing someone and deciding who they are before they have spoken. And in that realization, the showroom, for all its polished perfection, had been given something far more valuable than any car it could sell, a lesson that could not be displayed, could not be priced, but would shape every moment that followed. And as the lights dimmed slightly toward the evening, reflecting softly off the marble floors, the space settled into a calm that felt different from before, not just quieter, but wiser. As if it now carried the memory of a moment when everything had been revealed without a single raised voice. And in that stillness, the truth remained, simple and undeniable, that respect is not something you offer when it is convenient, but something you choose, long before you know who is standing in front of you.